What if everything you've been taught about reality was designed to keep you asleep? Imagine that your thoughts aren't just ideas, but living codes capable of bending the world around you. You were never told that ancient texts warned about this power because they feared what you could come. They knew, once you awaken, there's no going back. There is a hidden mechanism behind existence itself. It moves beneath your fears, your memories, and even your name. 99% of people will ignore it and unknowingly live a life that was never theirs to begin with. But some, a few, remember the truth that was buried. This is your moment to remember, to activate what was locked within you long before you were born. No fluff, no dogma, just the raw energy of real transformation. But only if you're ready. You were never meant to find this book. Its pages have crossed borders in silence, passing through the hands of mystics, rebels, and those who vanished without a trace. Not because it was dangerous to society, but because it was dangerous to control. Imagine a single text capable of rewriting your understanding of time, matter, and your own consciousness. Why was it hidden so carefully and for so long? Some say it began with the Corpus Hermeticum, a series of writings older than most religions we know. Others point to fragments buried beneath temple ruins in Alexandria, scorched during the fire that erased more than half of human history. But what unites these texts isn't just mystery, it's a recurring idea. That reality itself is shaped by perception, and perception is not passive. Giordano Bruno was burned alive for suggesting that the divine lives within, not above. And those who read the ancient scripts understood what that meant. Power no longer belonged to kings or priests. The Kybalion, published in 1908 under mysterious pseudonyms, was never just a book. It was a condensation of hermetic laws once kept behind closed doors, shared only in whispers. Its teachings on vibration, polarity, and mentalism shook the foundations of every rigid worldview. Because if the all is mind, then whose mind is creating this moment? And more importantly, who taught you to ignore that question? In 2015, a post on the forum Above Top Secret claimed that a former Vatican librarian leaked knowledge of hidden volumes stored in restricted chambers, text describing how thought manipulates the structure of matter. It was dismissed as conspiracy until others came forward, including a linguist who saw the index and recognized ancient Sumerian code. Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza often hint at this same current, that consciousness and quantum fields are not separate, that what we believe to be cause and effect is actually a tension collapsing probability. So why doesn't everyone know this? Because belief is currency and collective belief is control. If enough people accept that reality bends to inner frequency, old systems lose their grip. Not by violence, not by protest, but by irrelevance. That's the kind of change institutions aren't built to survive. But deep inside these forbidden words lies something even more disturbing. Not just that you can shape reality, but that you already are. And it's precisely at that point that reality begins to unravel. What if your mind wasn't just a processor of reality, but its source code? Not metaphorically, literally. What if ancient civilizations weren't primitive at all, but fully aware that consciousness isn't inside the brain is inside consciousness? This isn't fantasy. It's the central thread connecting spiritual traditions, quantum physics, and the forgotten science of inner technology. Somewhere along the way, someone taught you to stop asking how things happen, and to start accepting that they just do. Nassim Haramein, a physicist often ignored by mainstream science, has spent decades showing how consciousness affects geometry itself, suggesting that thought patterns alter the structure of space-time. His equations connect to ancient sacred designs, like the flower of life, found carved in stone in cultures that supposedly never contacted each other. Were they just drawing symbols or diagramming the way reality responds to awareness? If the universe has a pattern and your thoughts follow patterns too, then what happens when they align? In a Harvard study led by Dr. Herbert Benson, Tibetan monks demonstrated the ability to raise their body temperature using nothing but focused intention. No devices, no movement, just thought, breath, and attention. These aren't parlor tricks. They are demonstrations of something our culture has chosen to forget: that the body is not the master, it's the consequence. The mind, properly attuned, becomes the conductor of energy that forms everything. Cellular responses, emotions, outcomes, and even time perception itself. Tom Campbell, a physicist and former NASA analyst, developed a simulation theory from first-hand experimentation with consciousness states. He didn't read it in a book. He tested it repeatedly under conditions that mirrored double-blind setups. His conclusion? That reality functions like an information system, and we are the observers feeding it direction. But most people are observers without knowing they're also programmers. They send out commands through fear, repetition, and memory, and then wonder why nothing changes. The neuroscientist Dr. Caroline Leaf teaches that neuroplasticity, once thought limited to children, is active until death, and that thought itself reshapes the brain's structure. Your inner dialogues, your imagined scenarios, your suppressed emotions, these aren't ephemeral. They are construction material. You are sculpting something every second you're awake. And most people are building prisons because they've forgotten they can build doors. But there's a fracture in the structure, a place where raw thought meets raw matter. And that seam hasn't just been studied, it's been guarded. Because once you find that line and cross it, the old rules stop applying, and the self you thought you were begins to dissolve into something no philosophy has ever dared define. There are sounds you've heard your whole life that shaped you without permission. Words whispered in moments of fear, praise, silence. They didn't pass through you. They became you. Ancient cultures knew this. In nearly every sacred tradition, creation begins with a vibration, a tone, a name spoken into the void. You were taught that language is for communication. But what if its original function was creation itself? Dr. Masaru Emoto's water experiments shook the scientific community, not because they were perfect, but because they revealed something deeply intuitive. Water responds to intention. Crystals exposed to loving words formed intricate, symmetrical shapes. The ones exposed to hate turned chaotic, distorted. Our bodies are mostly water. So the question is unavoidable. What do your words do to your cells every time you speak? What about the ones you repeat silently? In a study at the University of Hawaii, researchers explored the psychological effects of the Ho'oponopono mantra, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you," on emotional processing. The results showed measurable changes in heart coherence and stress markers. It's not magic, it's frequency and repetition. But the real shift happens when you realize that it's not just what you say, it's the state you're in when you say it. Words are carriers. The energy behind them is the payload. There's a story shared by the YouTube channel Your Universe about a woman in Canada who suffered from chronic insomnia. No medication worked. One night, she decided to repeat a single phrase, "My body remembers how to rest," over and over before bed. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't even a belief. Just words spoken with presence. After 2 weeks, her sleep returned. Her story isn't unique, but it rarely makes headlines. Why? Because it's not profitable to tell you that your biology listens to your beliefs. Spoken or silent, casual or sacred, your words shape what you perceive, what you allow, what you repel. They aren't just reflections of thought. They are the thought frozen into sound. Think of them as keys, but not every word opens a door. Some lock them. And if you've been using the wrong language for years, it's not your fault that the same doors never opened. You were given the wrong keys. But hidden within the ancient texts is a sequence, a specific pattern of sound and intention that was only passed from teacher to student and never written. And it said that those who found the right combination didn't just unlock new realities, they vanished from this one entirely. Not all emotions are created equal. Some barely ripple the surface of your being, while others, when felt together, create a current strong enough to distort perception itself. You felt it before. That moment when time slows down, when a choice echoes louder than logic, when something unseen seems to respond before you even act. What causes that? It's not coincidence. It's the collision of 3 precise emotional frequencies. And when they align, they don't just influence your life, they bend it. The HeartMath Institute has spent decades studying the electromagnetic field of the heart. Their research proves what mystics always knew. The heart isn't just a pump, it's a transmitter. When gratitude, focus, and elevated emotion are felt simultaneously, they create coherence, not just inside the body, but with the environment around it. In this state, intentions seem to land differently, almost as if the universe hears them more clearly. Is it magic? Or have we simply misunderstood how the body interfaces with the field of reality? In an experiment conducted by Dr. Dean Radin, participants were able to influence random number generators using focused emotion beyond statistical probability. The data didn't lie. When people were emotionally charged and intentional, the machines responded. If artificial systems can be affected by emotion, what does that say about the physical world you live in? Your job, your health, your relationships, they're not immune. They're listening. A former U.S. military man, featured in Spirituality and Health magazine, reported a near-death experience in Afghanistan. In that moment of crisis, he described a strange fusion: acceptance, alertness, and surrender. He claims that time stretched, allowing him to see danger before it happened. Later, during therapy, he realized that those emotions had triggered a coherence in his nervous system that allowed him to function beyond normal limits. He didn't call it spiritual. He called it real. Most people chase happiness or avoid fear. But what if the real key isn't a single emotion, but the right combination at the right intensity? Like chemical elements, some emotions cancel each other out. Others ignite. Gratitude by itself soothes. But when combined with certainty and awe, it becomes fuel. And fuel bends the rules. But there's a shadow side to this formula, because emotions this powerful don't just build. They destroy. And if you enter this state with the wrong intention, the field doesn't judge. It amplifies. And that's where things begin to break in ways no one knows how to stop. You've been told to think positively, to visualize what you want, to act as if it's already real. And yet, deep down, a quiet frustration keeps growing. Why do the things you long for seem to run in the opposite direction the moment you reach for them? It's not because you're broken. It's because they never told you that thought, by itself, is incomplete. Desire is an engine, but without fuel, it doesn't move. And most people are unknowingly flooding it with the wrong kind. Psychologist Gabrielle Eddingen, in her research at New York University, uncovered something that flips the law of attraction on its head. Her studies show that indulging in positive fantasies without confronting real obstacles actually reduces the likelihood of achieving your goals. It dulls motivation. Why? Because your brain can't tell the difference between imagined success and real results. So it relaxes. You think you're programming your future, but you're pacifying your will. Elite athletes don't just visualize winning. They visualize the struggle, the blood, the resistance, the moment their muscles scream, but they don't stop. This is what performance coaches call the intention-action loop. Not just dreaming the outcome, but training the nervous system to fire under stress. And it works. Olympic runner Allyson Felix credits her gold medals not to motivation, but to mastering how her body and mind responded to imagined adversity. Desire without friction is fantasy. Friction with direction becomes force. Anika, a German spiritual influencer featured on At Awaken Europe, confessed something few in her community ever admit. For years, she visualized wealth and abundance. She made vision boards, chanted affirmations, but nothing changed. Not until she stopped pretending to be healed and began integrating her fear of failure into the process. Her turning point came when she allowed her insecurities to sit in the room with her goals. When I stopped resisting the ugly parts, she said, they stopped running the show. The result? Her income tripled within 6 months. Most people use manifestation as a mask. They dress up desire with fake certainty, hoping the universe can't smell the doubt underneath. But the universe isn't fooled. It's tuned to frequency, not performance. If the signal you're sending is built on repression instead of recognition, the feedback loop breaks. You don't get what you want. You get what you're wired to expect. And sometimes that expectation is quietly aligned with what you fear most. That's the part no one wants to face. Because if you really do shape your reality, then it's not your desire that matters. It's your unconscious permission. And what happens when your permission has been buried beneath years of pretending to be high vibe? That's the doorway no one wants to open, but the ones who do never live the same way again. There's a structure behind everything you've ever lived, whether you were aware of it or not. Nothing in your life happened just because. Not the people you met, not the patterns that repeat, not even the timing of your thoughts. It all unfolds according to three ancient forces, described long before modern science dared to approach them. They aren't religious, and they're not symbolic. They are mechanical, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. The first is the law of vibration, echoed in the Kybalion and later mirrored in quantum field theory. It states that nothing rests, everything moves. Your emotions, your thoughts, even your name carry a frequency. And what you call reality is actually a harmonic match to the signal you're already broadcasting. The second is the law of reflection, known to Carl Jung as the mirror principle. What you hate, what you desire, what you judge, it's not out there. It's you wearing a mask. The third is the law of rhythm. It governs cycles, expansion and contraction, gain and loss, love and grief. You don't escape it. You either move with it or get crushed beneath its tide. A spiritual coach in Mumbai, whose sessions were documented in the channel at Sadhguru Speaks, began teaching clients how to dance with these laws instead of fighting them. One participant tracked every emotional rise and fall for 90 days. Patterns appeared, not in events, but in internal shifts. Once he began anticipating the rhythm rather than resisting it, his relationships changed. His finances stabilized, and his anxiety, something no medication had ever touched, simply faded. He didn't control life. He understood it. Neville Goddard spoke of this too, but in different language. He called it assumption, the idea that your inner state impresses itself onto the outer world, whether you like it or not. Modern neuroscience supports it. Andrew Huberman's studies on expectation show that the brain prepares for outcomes based on internal narratives before external data arrives. In other words, your reality isn't responding to what you see. It's echoing what you already believe is coming. This triangle, vibration, reflection, rhythm, is not just a concept. It's the hidden architecture beneath your relationships, your emotional triggers, your luck, and your suffering. Most people are caught inside it, reacting to effects without seeing the cause. They chase highs and resist lows, ignoring the rhythm. They blame others, rejecting the reflection. They try to think positive without shifting vibration. It's not failure, it's blindness. But blindness doesn't protect you. It only delays the fall. Because the most dangerous part of these laws is that they work whether you believe in them or not. They don't wait for your understanding. They respond to your frequency. And for those who begin to observe them, trace them, and speak their language, the line between what is and what could be begins to blur in ways no logic can explain. And that's when something ancient stirs beneath the surface of ordinary life, something that has been waiting for your attention since the moment you were born. You think your thoughts are yours. You believe your choices come from reasoning, logic, maybe even intuition. But what if none of that is true? What if your brain is just a screen and the real projector, the one writing the script of your reality, is hidden behind the curtain of awareness? That's not science fiction. That's neuroscience, depth psychology, and ancient spiritual teaching, all pointing to the same unsettling truth. The self you think you are is just a surface reflection. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted an experiment that shook the foundation of free will. Using EEG machines, he discovered that the brain begins preparing for action several milliseconds before the person becomes consciously aware of the decision. The implication? You're not making choices. You're becoming aware of them after they're already made. This single finding, replicated many times since, raised a question so uncomfortable that many scientists still avoid it. Who, or what, is deciding before you do? Carl Jung spent most of his life trying to map that hidden part. He called it the unconscious, but not as a dumping ground for repressed memories. To him, it was the real engine of your life, the place where archetypes live, where shadow and potential swirl together. And more recently, Thinkers like Rupert Spira and Bernardo Castrop suggest that consciousness isn't a product of the brain at all. The brain is more like a filter, a translator. So if it's not the origin, what is? There's a man named Tom Campbell, a former NASA physicist, who tested this idea not through philosophy, but direct experimentation. In his book, My Big TOE Theory of Everything, he describes years spent in altered states of consciousness, states where he claims to have witnessed the decision-making process happening outside the boundaries of time and ego. He wasn't hallucinating. He was testing repeatable conditions, recording results. His conclusion? That consciousness precedes biology. That intention operates on levels far beyond neural networks. But this isn't just theoretical. When you begin to observe your own mind closely, really observe it, you notice something strange. Thoughts arrive uninvited. Impulses rise without origin. Fears and desires repeat like programmed loops. And beneath them, there's something watching. Something that never speaks, never moves, yet is always aware. The more attention you give it, the more the illusion of I begins to fade. Not into nothingness, but into something far more expansive than personality. And that's where the line begins to blur. Between the self you know, and the intelligence that's been quietly guiding everything behind the scenes. But here's the question no one wants to ask out loud. If you are not the one truly making decisions, then who is? And what happens when that deeper force starts to wake up and take the reins? You feel pain and think it means something is wrong. You see your reflection and assume that's who you are. You move through space, convinced your body is solid, real, reliable. But what if the body is just a puppet, an interface designed for experience, not truth? What if every sensation, every limitation, every ache and pleasure you've ever felt was a message from something deeper, translated into physical illusion by your nervous system? Science already knows that perception is not direct. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as the brain reconstructs it. Phantom limb syndrome is a brutal example. Amputees feel pain in limbs that no longer exist. Neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran's research showed that the brain clings to the map of the body, even when the body itself changes. The pain is real, but the source is gone. So what else in your life are you feeling that's no longer actually there? Peter Levine, founder of Somatic Experiencing, teaches that trauma isn't stored in memory, it's stored in the nervous system. The body keeps responding to danger that has already passed, trapping people in loops of tension, illness, and emotional paralysis. He doesn't use metaphysics to explain it, just biology, but the effect is spiritual. Because when those patterns are released, when the body is no longer chained to ghosts, people feel like they've come home to themselves. Author James Nestor, in his book Breath, describes how he transformed his physical health not through medicine or therapy, but by learning to control his breathing patterns. His sinuses opened, his blood pressure dropped, his focus sharpened. He wasn't healing the body, he was teaching the system to stop distorting reality. Because when breath slows, perception changes. And when perception changes, what you call body begins to dissolve into something less definable and far more powerful. The placebo effect has always been the forbidden proof that thought changes matter. When a sugar pill produces real healing, something is being exposed, not just about belief, but about the body's responsiveness to command. Harvard Medical School has documented this for years, not as spiritual truth, but hard science. Yet it's still dismissed. Because if we admit the body follows thought, we must also admit we've been captives of beliefs we never chose. So the question rises like a quiet wave beneath the surface. If the body is an illusion, what is the self that moves it? And what happens when that self decides to stop obeying the limits it never agreed to in the first place? There are sounds that heal, and there are sounds that disturb. But some frequencies do something stranger. They unlock not just emotion or memory, but layers of yourself that language can't reach. Ancient temples were built to amplify these tones. Monks, shamans, and healers used them not as music, but as technology. You were told it was ritual. What they didn't tell you is that certain sounds don't just influence the body, they open it. One of these frequencies is 528 Hz, often called the miracle tone. It's been linked to DNA repair and cellular regeneration. But that's just the surface. Dr. Lee Bartle, from the University of Toronto, has used this frequency in clinical settings to help patients with chronic pain and depression. The waveforms seem to synchronize with the body's rhythms, but more curiously, with emotion. People report feeling not just relaxed, but reset, like they stepped out of time, then returned with something missing: fear. In ceremonies using ayahuasca, sound is everything. Not background, not aesthetic. It is the guide. Shamans use chants known as the karos to navigate inner dimensions, not because the songs are beautiful, but because they're precise. Each tone, each vibration targets a part of the psyche. Neuroscientists studying these rituals found consistent changes in brainwave activity when these sounds were played, even without the substance. The sound alone was altering perception. Rafael Treza, a musician and filmmaker, documented his travels through the Himalayas in a YouTube series where he recorded chants from hidden temples. In one episode, he described a moment when a single, sustained tone hit a pitch that made his entire body vibrate from within. It was like I wasn't in my body anymore, he said. Not out of it, beyond it. These aren't metaphors. They're responses to a stimulus your nervous system doesn't know how to lie about. And not all frequencies are healing. In the 1980s, Soviet military experiments tested infrasonic weapons, low-frequency sound used to disorient, disturb, even control. Victims experienced anxiety, confusion, and sometimes full-body shutdowns, all without knowing why. The body interpreted the sound as an invisible threat. And that's the point. Frequencies bypass logic. They speak directly to the architecture of your being. They don't ask for permission. So the question becomes, what happens when you find the frequency? The one that silences the inner critic, dissolves the mask, and speaks directly to the forgotten identity underneath? Some say it brings peace. Others say it erases the line between self and source. But one thing is always reported: no one who hears it stays the same. What if what you call reality isn't solid, stable, or even random, but code? Not metaphorical code, but actual, responsive patterns obeying hidden laws. You wake up each day assuming the world is out there, fixed, and separate. But what if that's the illusion? What if everything you feel, see, touch is rendered based on the signals you're constantly sending, like a living interface designed to reflect your internal architecture? Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe laid the foundation for a shocking idea: that the universe behaves like a hologram, where every part contains the whole. Neurosurgeon Carl Pribram and physicist David Bohm back this up with their respective studies in neurophysiology and quantum mechanics. Their combined theory, that the brain decodes a holographic field and that what we perceive as space, time, and matter is a projection, an output, not an origin. Meaning, consciousness writes the code and the body interprets it. In France, a documentary by the Channel ART followed holistic therapists who use a method called symbolic decoding. Patients identify recurring dreams, symbols, or behaviors, and the therapist helps them interpret these as programs, scripts running in the subconscious. The results were profound. Psychosomatic illnesses began to dissipate, not through medicine, but through internal rewriting. They weren't treating the symptoms. They were editing the source code. A group in the Netherlands known as Codex Hamani practices a fusion of numerology and visualization, assigning numeric sequences to states of being. Through focused meditation, they install these frequencies into their daily lives. Their process mirrors ancient Pythagorean methods, but modernized for what they call biosoftware. The results, as shared in their interviews, aren't guaranteed. But when it works, they say, it feels like reality bends to meet them halfway, as if something behind the curtain is listening. In the 1990s, Princeton University's PEAR Lab ran a decades-long experiment using random number generators. Participants attempted to influence outcomes using only thought. Over time, the data showed a statistically significant anomaly. Human intention was biasing the results. The implication? Reality has input fields. It listens. And it responds, not to force, but to frequency. And frequency is shaped by belief, emotion, and clarity. So if reality is code and you're both the user and the input, what happens when you stop trying to fix the external world and start rewriting the instructions? Not affirmations, not wishful thinking, actual internal commands. Because somewhere inside you is the line of code that changes everything. But the system won't reveal it until you stop believing the illusion is real. There are moments when life responds so quickly it feels supernatural. A message you needed arrives out of nowhere. An answer comes before the question is fully formed. Most people call it coincidence, synchronicity, maybe luck. But what if it's none of those? What if you've already issued a command and didn't know it? Because when the mind, body, and field align with clarity and force, reality stops being slow and random and starts obeying. Physicist Amit Goswami introduced the concept of collapsing the wave function through conscious choice. He wasn't speaking philosophically, he meant it in quantum terms. In his model, potential exists as pure probability until observation and intention select one outcome over all others. What makes it collapse? Emotion, clarity, and belief. In other words, the quality of your presence determines what becomes real. Not just in theory, but in your relationships, your health, your path forward. Dr. Joe Dispenza's brain scans show how individuals in deep meditative states create neurological patterns as if their future already happened. It's not imagination, it's embodiment. The body begins to believe it's living that version of reality. In these sessions, synchronized brainwave states and elevated emotions generate electromagnetic coherence that radiates out from the heart. Some participants report major life changes within days, not because they forced them, but because the signal they were sending became too coherent to ignore. British coach Clara Kin, in an interview on her site, shared how she trained over 500 people to enter this state using a simple but potent technique. First, recall a memory of complete certainty. Then, visualize a desired event with that same emotional texture, not from need, but from fullness. Within weeks, participants reported breakthroughs that had eluded them for years. This wasn't faith, it was alignment, like tuning an instrument until every string resonates with the same frequency. But here's the secret most people miss. The command only works when there's no resistance. And most resistance is unconscious. You may want love, but fear intimacy. You may want wealth, but carry guilt about having more than others. Until those conflicting frequencies are neutralized, the command splits. The signal weakens. The field hesitates. And what you receive is exactly that: hesitation, delay, distortion. Because the quantum field doesn't respond to what you say. It responds to what you are. And when who you are becomes a single, undivided frequency, emotion, thought, body, and intention pointing in the same direction, creation doesn't trickle in slowly. It erupts. But the eruption is not always gentle, and what comes next isn't always what the conscious mind expected. Some people get what they want and lose everything else. Others manifest their dreams, only to discover they've built prisons lined with gold. No one talks about this side of creation, the part where your desires come true, but at a cost you never calculated. Because when you access real power, when you actually learn to shape reality, you're not just activating light. You're waking up something older, something darker, and it always listens. A former follower of a well-known guru in southern India shared his story in a rare interview on the channel Karma Unveiled. He claimed to have manifested success after immersing himself in intensive spiritual practices meant to harness the energy of creation. Money, influence, and recognition came fast. But then the dreams began. Vivid, violent, filled with shadows that mimicked his voice. Over time, his mind fractured. Diagnosed with a psychological disorder, he withdrew from public life. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded too fast, without cleaning the foundation. Teal Swan, a controversial yet widely followed spiritual teacher, calls this the paradox of manifestation. Her view is simple and uncomfortable. Many of your desires don't come from your soul, they come from trauma. You crave control because you once felt powerless. You seek visibility because you were invisible. So when the universe responds to those distorted frequencies, it doesn't heal you, it amplifies what's broken. You don't get love. You get obsession. You don't get peace. You get escape wrapped in silence. In psychology, this is known as shadow projection. Carl Jung warned that if you don't confront your shadow, it runs your life, and you call it fate. When you ignore the parts of you that are wounded, angry, ashamed, they don't vanish. They become magnetized. And when paired with spiritual tools, they attract outcomes that mirror your unconscious fractures. But because they look like success, you don't question them until it's too late. This is the side of reality creation that's rarely discussed. The weight beneath the wish, the echo behind the affirmation. When power flows through a divided vessel, it doesn't heal the cracks. It expands them, and suddenly, the life you thought you wanted begins to close in. Not because you were wrong to want, but because you never asked why you wanted it in the first place. So the real danger isn't in failing to manifest. It's in succeeding without realizing that the signal you sent out wasn't desire at all. It was fear, dressed up as light. And when the field responds to that, it doesn't correct you. It gives you exactly what you asked for. And then it waits to see if you're ready for what comes next. You change cities. You leave relationships. You switch jobs, habits, clothes. And yet, somehow, life keeps handing you the same feeling in a different form. Different faces, same wounds. New plans, same endings. Why? Because there's something deeper than action that decides what repeats, and most people never find it. They think they're changing their lives, but they're just walking in circles on a wheel they can't see. In Tantra, there's a concept rarely mentioned outside initiatory circles, the loop of energetic imprint. It's the idea that unresolved emotional charges become energetic patterns, spinning like wheels inside you, silently pulling reality into their orbit. If the loop is fear of abandonment, you'll recreate it with friends, lovers, even mentors. If it's unworthiness, you'll unconsciously design situations where you're overlooked, no matter how talented or generous you are. You think life is unfair, but life is just obedient. Stanford University conducted a longitudinal study showing that people who view themselves as authors of their own lives, rather than victims of circumstance, were more likely to break long-term behavioral patterns. But the turning point wasn't willpower. It was self-perception. The moment they began seeing the loop, they stepped outside it. They didn't escape by running. They escaped by recognizing what they were repeating and choosing something else, even when it felt unfamiliar and unsafe. One example comes from Luana, a Brazilian woman who shared her story in a podcast on Consciência Desperta. For years, she found herself earning just enough to survive, regardless of the job, the country, or the level of effort. A healer introduced her to the practice of conscious cycles, a method of journaling and breath work that helps map repeating emotional states. Within weeks, she saw a 6-month rhythm in her highs and lows, tied to an unresolved belief of scarcity from her childhood. Once she shifted that belief, not just mentally, but somatically, her income stabilized for the first time in a decade. Most people don't change because they never identify what needs changing. They rearrange the furniture, but never notice the floor tilts. The loop hides in the body, the tone of your voice, the timing of your reactions. It lives in what you expect, but never say aloud. And until it's named, it keeps writing your story with the same ending, dressed in slightly different words. So here's the truth most won't admit. The wheel keeps turning, not because life is cruel, but because something inside you is still waiting to be seen. And when that part is finally seen, not judged, not fixed, just recognized, the wheel begins to slow. But just before it stops, something even older begins to stir. There's a voice inside you that isn't quite you. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It waits. And every time you approach a turning point, a breakthrough, a new level of joy, a risk that could change your path, it steps forward. Not to guide, to guard. Ancient traditions knew this figure well. They called it the threshold guardian. You might call it fear, doubt, hesitation. But it's more than that. It's the part of you designed to keep your reality small enough to survive. In mythology, Joseph Campbell described this as the guardian of the threshold, a force that blocks the hero not because it hates them, but because it protects the structure they're trying to leave. In real life, this archetype shows up in self-sabotage, sudden fatigue before action, the strange urge to postpone what matters most. It's the gatekeeper of the subconscious, and it only lets you pass when you've proven that the identity you're trying to leave behind has truly died. Modern Jungian psychologist Jean Shinoda Bolin explains that the ego itself becomes this gatekeeper when it's afraid of expansion. Growth threatens its stability. To change means to dissolve. So it resists not by attacking you, but by subtly redirecting your energy. You clean the house instead of writing the book. You text an ex instead of facing your loneliness. You study techniques endlessly but never apply them. And you call it not ready, when really it's protection. In indigenous traditions, this transition isn't avoided, it's ritualized. The Shipibo people of the Amazon, during plant ceremonies, speak of passing through the serpent, a terrifying symbolic force that tests whether you're ready to carry new vision. In a lecture documented by anthropologist Stanley Krippner, a shaman explained, "If you meet the serpent and run, it follows. If you meet it and freeze, it consumes. But if you bow to it, it opens the way." This archetype isn't evil. It's ancient, and it doesn't vanish with affirmation or force. It moves only when it feels you've remembered who you are beneath the roles, the wounds, the masks. Because if it opens too early, what comes through can shatter a mind that isn't anchored. So the gate stays closed, not to punish, but to protect something sacred. But what happens when the gatekeeper finally steps aside? What lies on the other side isn't just more of what you want. It's the part of you that was never allowed to exist until now. And when that part wakes up, even your past begins to rewrite itself. When I closed the book, something was different. Not loud, not obvious, but irreversible. It wasn't just what the pages said. It was what they unlocked. The strange sense that something ancient had been quietly waiting and reading me the whole time. The words weren't teaching, they were remembering. And the more I read, the more I realized this book didn't want to be understood. It wanted to be activated. George Lakoff, a linguist and cognitive scientist, spent years proving that metaphors shape the way we think, feel, and perceive the world. Not as poetry, but as architecture. The language you use doesn't describe your reality. It constructs it. That's why ancient texts are layered in metaphor, symbol, and paradox. Because direct instruction isn't enough. The deeper truths only enter through the symbolic doorways that logic can't walk through. They must be felt into being. Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "Truth is a pathless land." He warned us not to seek salvation in books or methods, but also knew that some books are mirrors, not sources of knowledge, but catalysts. The real power is never in the technique, it's in the decision. The moment when you stop consuming ideas and allow one of them to consume you, not as belief, but as transformation, not as information, but as fire. There's a growing wave of teachers and influencers abandoning complex systems for something simpler, quieter. Samira Lee, known online as at Spiritual Decoded, shared in an interview that after a decade of practices, rituals, and teachings, she dropped it all. No affirmations, no visualizations, just presence, breath, silence. Within a month, she felt a shift deeper than anything years of study had given her. It was like the book had always been inside me, she said. I just stopped trying to read it from the outside. This is where the line blurs. Between study and surrender. Between searching and seeing. Between seeking truth and becoming it. You don't need to believe everything you've heard. You don't even need to understand it all. But there's a moment when the choice arrives, quiet, unannounced. And it asks not for your certainty, but for your willingness. Because this book, this power, this forbidden knowledge was never meant to be obeyed. It was meant to wake something up. And once it does, the old self begins to fade, not in fear, but like mist burning off in sunlight. And in its place, something ancient and electric begins to rise, but only for those who dare not turn the page, but become it.